Hi, welcome to the Small Shed. This week we're going to what I think is the finest car museum of the British car industry. See you in a minute. Now, I've been taking a bit of a break from doing stuff, if you like, for the last few weeks. I got to a stage where I was doing too much and at the expense of everything else. But one thing that came up during that mad hectic period was the first anniversary of when we set the Cycle Cart Club up over at Gaydon, and I did a very quick visit around the museum when we did that. But a couple of weeks ago I went back to the first annual general meeting there, and I went and had a look at some of the areas that I haven't been to before and see some of the exhibits. So if you're remotely interested in the British car industry and the sort of cars of, well, you're probably your parents, we'll go and have a walk round and see what there is on offer. Now, on this visit I'd taken the opportunity to go to the building that I hadn't been into before, because I thought it housed the Jaguar collection that came from Castle Bromwich that I'd viewed many years ago over on the other Jaguar site. But in fact I found out once I got in there that it houses a pretty large collection of all sorts of British car marques with all sorts of interesting stuff there. There's a workshop down on the ground floor that carries out heritage repairs for their cars and keeps them all on the road, keeps them running. And then you've got essentially on the ground floor a huge part of the Jaguar collection that came from Castle Bromwich. 77RW is one of the very first E-types and was the press car, but there's a collection of E-types, D-types and all sorts. There's also the old Austin 7 based SS Swallow sidecars cars, which are essentially where Jaguar started from. SS sports cars became Jaguar in later years, and there are examples of the early Jaguar SS's and all the Jaguars from the 120s, the 140s, 150s, D-types, E-types, C-types and all sorts there. So it's a pretty comprehensive collection, but as I say, I had thought it was just the Jaguars. In fact, it's got an awful lot more. There are also the Daimler Jaguars, which there was a tie-up with Daimler at various stages, and it became Jaguar Daimler, and they rebadged a lot of the Jaguar cars as Daimlers. The 3.8, 3.4, 3.2 Jags that were used so heavily by the bank robbers and the likes were put out with the Daimler badging on and a boot on. There's also the Formula 1 cars, the XK1 220, which was one of the first supercars that was produced by the firm. And also of more interest to me were a lot of the specials, if you like, their design stages of evolutions of cars, things that never got to be built, one-offs, and they're all sort of got their own interesting story that there's usually a placard on the car to describe it. And all the cutaway models and models with glass bonnets and all sorts of things. Jaguar estate car that they produced as a sort of a one-off, convertibles. These are things that never actually made it to marketplace. And some of the Royal Daimlers are there as well. The Austin Powers Jaguar. The Jaguar from one of the James Bond films as well, the green one. So there's a huge selection of unusual, rare, one-offs and production cars in amongst that whole collection. the XJS's. Then up on the floor above it there are a whole collection of other cars from different marques, which is what the thing I'd missed in the past, as well as again the usual collection of oddities like cutaway minis and one-offs. You can see down below the workshop from above, see stuff that they're working on just to keep the fleet on the road. And again with the tie-up with Jaguar is Land Rover, and there are quite a lot of the Land Rover bits and pieces there as well in the collection. But it's more than that, it's pretty much all of the British manufacturing, car manufacturing producers post-war pretty much. I think the only one noticeable omission is Ford. Whether or not they've got their own museum or what, I don't know, but it tends to be that it's nearly all the BMC British Leyland type cars and the Jaguar Land Rover sort of collection of companies, but there's Morris's, Daimler's, Wolseley's, all of the heritage of British motoring. And these things are 3 or 4 deep either side of the gangway, so there's a good day's visit just in that one building alone. The early minis like ours, the Mini 1. Ours is still going strong 22 years later with 60,000 on the clock and hardly run in. Land Rovers, Rovers, Metros, and they've also got the last of several of the runs. That's the last Metro. They run them down the assembly line and everybody there signs on them on the body, and they get kept in the collection. I think that's a Montego, I think, last one again down the production run. All the Rover 200s, 25s and the like, Triumphs, and again the odd cars like the one-off Mini that's a styling exercise with a slightly different front end on it. They've got electric versions, experimental stuff, record breaking attempt stuff, cutaway models, all sorts of things that are worthy of interest, well worth looking at. Times TR7, again another styling exercise, early electric experiments, looks suspiciously like a Vauxhall. The Stag, Vandenpla Princess, and again another oddity based on the, I think, the 1100. Very strange things, but they're all the things you don't normally get to see because they've been kept in closed rooms, very often scrapped, but often kept and as styling exercises and thoughts that they might produce something one day. Some of them would have been undoubtedly bestsellers had they ever put them into production, but you can only assume it's lack of technological ability and or money that stopped them happening. Famous British rally stuff, the Land Crab that did the, I think it was London to Sydney, the Rover 2000, first car I ever travelled over 100 mile an hour in. A bloke up the road was working at the Rover and brought an experimental one home. Queen's Land Rover, or one of the Queen's Land Rovers. An odd Ford prefect at the back there, which is, as I say, an oddity because there aren't many Fords in amongst this collection. The Austins. Again, Vauxhalls again with the flute on the bonnet that is so characteristic as a styling cue. The Shaun Sheep Land Rover up in the corner, inspired by the film. And then I went back into the original exhibition hall. This is what was built in the first place, and as I mentioned, I've been here a year previously with the cycle carts and I'd done a very quick whiz round, but I thought I'd do a bit more in-depth look at what's there. Again, some of the oddities that they have, some of the unusual vehicles. And the beauty of the exhibition is that it's there for me 40 miles away, and your one entrance fee will do you for a year, so I can come and go as I please pretty much for a year to come and see these things, because the displays change, they get different cars in, and it's always a good day out to go and have a look and see all our motoring heritage. Classic Rolls. All the prototypes on matchbox type boxes. Some of them, as I say, if they'd ever built them, I think they would have been onto a winner. That's a Vauxhall prototype that is based, it looks very much like the American Stingray, the front end. The MG XE, which again I think would have sold well. And then there's the gas turbines that Rover played with over in the 1950s, from the very first experimental one through to the one that was most like a production car. They ran one at Le Mans one year, and again it was a route that they tried but never really got anywhere with as a motive propulsive sort of force. Gas turbine never really caught on. And then there's the MGs, the very first, well, the very earliest Lotus, the Lotus 6 I think. Colin Chapman started with Austin 7s and adapting them. Morgans, there, just down the road in Malvern, been around the works a couple of times there. And the three-wheeler Morgan that's pretty much the inspiration for my little Hetty the trike. Lotus Elan, yes, Elan I think. The Jensen FF, which was the four-wheel drive Jensen Interceptor. Got the Ferguson four-wheel drive system. Again, a millionth Austin, signed by all the workers and looking a little bit grubby, but you can't really clean it because of all the signatures that they'd lose. Another Lotus. And then on to some of the weird Land Rovers, the forward control one that was built for the military. Lots of the expedition ones that had got all sorts of visits to foreign countries under the belts. The SAS Land Rover. One of the very first Land Rovers, just after the war, built. The SAS Land Rover, and again a Royal one which is based on the Range Rover. One in purple. And there's the old Bill bus that did so much Sterling service in World War One. They took a lot over to France to ferry troops around. I think the desert ones were the long range desert group Land Rovers that they used to use. Riley's another name that has gone. Strangely tracked Land Rovers. They used to have a special vehicles division that produced all sorts of weird and wonderful combinations for one-off expeditions and industrial applications. And then there's the ubiquitous Minis that did so well in rallying, Monte Carlo's rallies and that. Were early Austin racer. And again some of the more recent sports cars, racing cars. And the blue single-seater Austin 7. I was a bit perturbed at the time because I couldn't see the green one that I'm modelling my cycle kart on, but I did find it later on. There's all the MG record-breaking cars. They've again done a lot of record land speed racing attempts over the years, and there's quite a collection of those in the Gaydon Museum. And I went into the Austin 7 exhibition because it's the 100th year centenary celebrations. They had got all the Austin 7s in a totally separate area, and that explained why I couldn't find the green single-seater, because they'd moved it out of the main exhibition hall into here, and so really I couldn't have any visit to an exhibition without going and at least seeing it and the Austin 7s. And there she is in the corner, looking resplendent. I suspect it looks a lot prettier than it did when it was actually racing in its heyday, but still well worth a visit as far as I'm concerned. And again, it's useful to get these visits just to pick up on odd details. It doesn't matter how many times I go and visit and how many times I look at and how many pictures I take. I always find something missing when I'm back at home that I've forgotten to see how it works or what it looks like. So it's always worth going back and having another visit, picking up on odd details of how exhausts are fixed and things like that. Back in the main exhibition area there's the Judge Dredd Land Rovers from the film. There's the Ford Lady Penelope mobile from one of the movies. And there's the Only Fools and Horses Trottermobile and Del Boy's Capri. I think that's a Tomb Raider Land Rover from the Lara Croft movie. And there's some of the early electric vehicles and experimentals. There's also the mini mope there that my brother had one as well that we used to have a lot of fun in. Then there's a mezzanine floor up there, which on the way past I went and had a look at the Pathfinder Austin 7, which is my first car, if you like, my first pedal car, and pretty much the reason for choosing the single seat Austin 7 as the cycle car. Fond memories of running that up and down the pavement. And up on the top floor there's a fairly large collection of Vauxhalls which they've brought in from somewhere fairly recently, I think, because I haven't seen those before. But there's all sorts of one-offs and historic vehicles and just cars that you'd forgotten about almost. The Crestas and the Vivas, the early Vivas. That I had one as a firm's car, the Firenze. Crestas, Victors. And again the Lotus with the Vauxhall. It was essentially a Lotus that Vauxhall built with their own engine in it. There's also a mock-up garage there that brought back huge memories to me of Dad's garage. Although it was he moved over the road from his first setup, but this was very much what my dad first started in, a unit about that size, with a single pit underneath the car, and the smells and the sounds were pretty evocative. So without spending any more time there, I came out and had a look. Last place you need to go and have a look always is go and have a look at the shop and see if there's anything to buy. A huge amount of books on various marques and famous cars, individual cars. Always worth a look, as well as all the usual gift tap that you get in this sort of place. But all in all, pretty good day. I've forgotten what it costs exactly, but I think it's about $17.50, something like that, for a ticket. As I say, that gives you a pass for a year. Really well worth it if you're anywhere within striking distance to go back and visit again and I probably make 3 or 4 visits a year at least, so it becomes relatively cheap. It's the old intercity Airways plane there that we used to take the car down to Switzerland in, fly it down, all sorts of memories. So there we are, lots of memories, lots of happy memories of cars that I've known, cars that I've seen when I was a child, cars I've driven, and it's all there at a relatively reasonable cost. I think it's about £16 or £17, but the ticket will enable you to get in at any time during the following year as well. So being on its doorstep about 40 miles away, it's something that I can buy an annual ticket and drop in and out, and the exhibits are constantly changing, so really well worth the money for me anyway. Hope the video was of interest. Look forward to seeing you next time. We'll be doing something different. I'll see you then. Bye!